This is the mop-up for March 24th. March 24th, 2024. I'm David Feldman coming to you in New York City. Thank you for finding me. I've got a cold, so this will mostly be the NyQuil and the Sudafed talking. Without any consideration for Marjorie Taylor Greene's feelings, President Joseph Biden signed into law a budget for 2024. We got a budget. It took 6 months, but the House and Senate finally put to bed the 2024 budget. And the government remains funded until the end of September, when the 2025 fiscal year begins and this nonsense starts all over again. The $1.2 trillion spending package passed the Senate at 2 a.m. Saturday morning. Now, technically, the government had already been shut down since the deadline was Friday at midnight. Some thought Senate Majority Leader Democrat Chuck Schumer couldn't get it done and would have to wait until Monday to get all the votes, as Senate Republicans slowed the process to a crawl by introducing amendments that could never pass the 60-vote threshold to overcome a filibuster. But somehow he got it done with 74 senators in favor, 24 against. Schumer had to get the House version of the bill passed because the House had already left for its 2-week Easter vacation after passing their version of the bill on Friday. They were out. Here's the bill. Take it or leave it. We got 2 weeks off. So that meant if Schumer and the Senate planned to amend any parts of what the House passed, there would be no House of Representatives to negotiate with, or for that matter, approve a final version of the bill. It was basically take it as it is. And despite Marjorie Taylor Greene's protestations, the House and the Senate, they passed the last part of the 2024 budget, and Joe Biden signed it into law. We have, 6 months late, a 2024 budget. Now, as you know, the budget is comprised of 12 appropriations bills. The first tranche of 6 bills were passed earlier in the month. That came to $459 billion. The second tranche, the more contentious one, had to get passed by midnight Friday, or there would be a partial shutdown. And this was the much harder bill to pass, not only because of its $1.2 trillion price tag. This was the bill that included funding for the Departments of Labor, Defense, Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, and the State Department, all the agencies that are wildly unpopular in the Republican Party, including the Pentagon. The Republican Party has turned on the Pentagon. This bill, the one that passed early Saturday morning, covered 70% of all discretionary spending. And according to Senator Susan Collins, who sits on the Appropriations Committee, she's from Maine, she says 70% of that is spent on our military. 70% of all our discretionary spending for 2024 spent on the military. She thought that's a good idea. Bernie Sanders voted against the bill because it didn't offer any aid to the Palestinians living in Gaza. But they got it passed. And now our soldiers get a 5.2% raise. That's the largest pay bump in nearly 2 decades. The bill barely addressed the migrant issue, with increased spending for 2,000 new Border Patrol agents and 8,000 additional beds for ICE detention centers, which should be shut down. It did not include any funding to finish Donald Trump's wall, because I assume Mexico is going to pay for that. I mean, that's what Donald Trump promised. The spending bill earmarked only $300 million in defense spending for Ukraine. That's far less than the $62 billion President Biden has been seeking since August of last year. As I said, the House is now on a 2-week Easter vacation, and when they get back, Speaker Johnson will have no excuse for not bringing the Ukraine supplemental to the floor for a vote. No excuse other than he's secretly rooting for Putin. The bill that already passed in the Senate is the supplemental that provides a total of $95 billion in defense spending to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, along with humanitarian aid for Gaza. This is a supplemental. They passed the budget. A supplemental means, in addition to the budget, we want to spend $95 billion extra. That's why it's called a supplemental. $95 billion above and beyond what we're already spending for Israel, Taiwan, Ukraine, and humanitarian aid for Gaza. And this has been languishing in the House since August of last year. Johnson has refused to bring the Senate bill to the House floor. Now, he claims he wants to fund Ukraine. He claims he doesn't want to be the one responsible for Ukraine falling to Russia. It really, if Ukraine falls, it will be because of Mike Johnson. He will not bring the Ukraine supplemental up for a vote. We all know it would pass. The votes are there. But if he brought it to the floor for a vote, that would make Putin angry. And when you make Putin angry, you make Donald Trump angry. So, Donald Trump, Putin, they've been holding up funding for Ukraine since August. So has Mike Johnson since he became Speaker. He's been holding up funding for Ukraine. The pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party is pressuring Mike Johnson not to bring the supplemental to the floor because they want Ukraine to lose. And they're no longer being secretive about it. Now, not all Republicans want Ukraine to lose. Some Republicans are still not owned and operated by Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. For example, one Republican is Pennsylvania Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick. He wants to fund Ukraine. He has a version of the Senate bill ready to be voted on in the House, as does Massachusetts Democrat Jim McGovern. We've talked about discharge petitions before. Democrat McGovern, Jim McGovern, and Republican Brian Fitzpatrick both have bills that fund Ukraine, and they're variations on the bill that has already passed in the Senate. If the House voted on both bills, the House could work it out in a conference committee with the Senate. But Mike Johnson refuses to release the two bills and allow them to be voted on. Either one would be passed. Both would be passed. There is a parliamentary procedure to remove the two bills from Mike Johnson's grasp and force the vote in the House. It's called a discharge petition. And there are two discharge petitions circulating inside the House as we speak. A discharge petition requires 218 signatures. If you can get 218 members of Congress, members of the House of Representatives, to sign it, then the bill is automatically introduced on the floor for a vote. It's discharged. The Speaker has no say. It bypasses the Rules Committee, just goes right to the floor for a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Now, like I said, there are two competing discharge petitions for two competing Ukraine supplementals that really aren't that different. One is proposed by the Republicans, Brian Fitzpatrick, which the Democratic leadership opposes, and one proposed by the Democrats, Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, which you guessed, the Republicans oppose. To give you an idea of how much ill will and bad blood there is circulating throughout the Republican caucus in the House, one of Colorado Republican Ken Buck's last acts as United States Congressman last week was on Friday, when he, Buck, a Republican, signed Jim McGovern's discharge petition. Jim McGovern is the Democrat. Ken Buck has had it with his Republican caucus. He quit He's gone. He left midterm. He is one of two members of the Freedom Caucus who voted to certify the election for Joe Biden. So he's pretty far right, but he's an institutionalist. He refused to vote for Jim Jordan or Steve Scalise for Speaker after he couldn't get them to admit that Donald Trump lost the election to Joe Biden. He did, however, vote for Mike Johnson, who led the election denial charge in the House during the lead up to January 6. So Ken Buck voted for Johnson and then immediately threw his hands up and said, "I quit." He's out the door. And his parting shot was signing Democrat Jim McGovern's discharge petition. Buck is as close to a principled Republican you can find still left in the House of Representatives, but he's gone now. And that means all the principled Republicans are pretty much leaving. Kay Granger, I mean, they're out the door. What does that mean when all the principled Republicans go out the door? Well, one possibility is that the GOP completely implodes come November because it's been overrun by the crazies. Or the Republicans win and the crazies take over. All arrows point to an implosion, which I'll get to in a second. There's some new polling out that shows Joe Biden got a big bump off that State of the Union. But all signs point to a Republican implosion in November now. However, there's not a shred of decency left inside the House Republican caucus. House Republicans are now there for one reason: to do Donald Trump's bidding. What happens, God forbid, if Donald Trump wins in November? The entire party is run by crazies. Speaker Johnson was able to get the $1.2 trillion spending bill passed in the House the same way he's gotten all the continuing resolutions passed, by doing an end run around obstructionist members of the Freedom Caucus and the far right by relying on Democrats to vote for it. He introduced both budget bills this month through a parliamentary process known as suspension, which means all the rules for how the bills would be introduced and then later voted on, all the rules suspended. And it went straight to the floor for a thumbs up, thumbs down vote. But when you suspend the rules, the bill no longer needs a simple majority in order to pass. It needs 2/3 of the House. And that means the Democrats have to be on board. They were. A majority of House Republicans voted against the bill on Friday. Majority of House Republicans voted against the spending bill on Friday. It was the Democrats who pushed it over the top. That's how suspension works. You need 2/3 of the House. So there's always a bit of a kabuki dance when the Republican Speaker passes a bill through suspension and relies on Democrats. A majority of Republicans on Friday got to vote against the spending bill, which means they get to posture and raise money off their voting against the bill. But they don't have to live with the consequences of actually being responsible for the government getting shut down. Kevin McCarthy got the first continuing resolution passed using suspension. Johnson has gotten all his continuing resolutions and these budget bills passed using suspension because it allows the Freedom Caucus and all those so-called far-right firebrands in the House to fulminate about reckless spending. They can position themselves as heroic by laying claim to, "I voted against the budget." They get to remain the fiscal hawks who refuse to move. So there's a lot of political posturing going on where House Republicans can save face while Johnson gets to save the government. You saw the dance right after the budget passed in the House on Friday. Just as Johnson handed the bill up to the Senate, he immediately faced what I consider a staged revolt from the far right, who came to Washington to be flamethrowers. But January 6th notwithstanding, they probably don't want to burn the place down. Some of them might actually want to burn the place down, but for the most part, they act like flamethrowers. And this dance, this Republican dance, is tiresome. It's boring. Marjorie Taylor Greene immediately filed a motion to vacate the chair after Johnson got the budget passed in the House. She held her big press conference on the steps of the Capitol, and she got to rant and rave against Mike Johnson and irresponsible spending as though she even read the bill. But she did file a motion to vacate the chair. She wants her headlines. She wants her attention. She got it. There was a packed press conference on the steps of the Capitol. Everybody was listening to Marjorie Taylor Greene. According to the rules, all it takes is one member of the House to introduce a motion to vote on whether to remove the Speaker. If you remember, Matt Gaetz from Florida succeeded last autumn in removing Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Back then, Matt Gaetz needed 7 other Republicans to vote against McCarthy, and Gaetz found them, and McCarthy was removed. But now, the GOP majority has gotten so thin, it's down to a 1-vote majority. I keep rereading this. Can that be true? Yes. Speaker Johnson has a 1-vote majority. So all it takes right now is 2 House Republicans to vote against Mike Johnson. He's gone, completely gone. Unless, of course, the Democrats decide to protect him. I'll have more on that in a second. Now, Republicans are jumping ship. It seems like they're jumping ship. It's actually not a record-setting year for members of Congress quitting. And there are actually more Democrats quitting the House right now than Republicans. But Republicans are leaving in the middle of the year, in the middle of the Congress, not after November. And they're leaving their Speaker with barely a majority. He's down to 1. He's got a 1-vote majority. That's what makes this mass resignation historic. This is the smallest Republican majority in American history. Down to 1. 1. Wisconsin Republican Mike Gallagher, who at one time was considered a rising star in the Republican Party, called it quits. And he did it in a way that really screwed over Mike Johnson and the Republicans. Had Gallagher quit earlier this month, then the state of Wisconsin could hold a special election to replace him. But Gallagher waited until that deadline passed before he quit. That means his seat remains vacant until January of 2025, when the new Congress gets sworn in. It was a slap in the face to the Speaker, to Donald Trump, and the entire Republican caucus, because Gallagher had enough. He alienated Republicans by voting against the impeachment of Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas. And he has been a vocal critic of those inside his party who still insist Joe Biden stole the election. He had it after January 6th, but he still wouldn't vote to impeach Donald Trump. And now he's gone. And that seat stays open until January of 2025. No special elections. According to Wisconsin law, there's a deadline, middle of March. Once you pass that, they just leave the seat open until they vote in November. And once again, this means, depending on who shows up for a vote and how upcoming special elections go, right now, Mike Johnson, when Congress returns in 2 weeks, will only be able to lose one vote on a bill or a motion to vacate the chair. In other words, all Marjorie Taylor Greene needs is one other Republican to join her, and Mike Johnson faces the same fate as Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who became the first speaker in American history to be removed from office without their party losing its majority. Since she filed the motion for Johnson to vacate the chair on Friday, Marjorie Taylor Greene has gotten a lot of pushback from other Republicans who are becoming increasingly protective of Mike Johnson. Matt Gaetz from Florida, who got McCarthy kicked to the curb, said Friday he's not prepared to join Marjorie Taylor Greene in forcing Mike Johnson's removal. Even though Mike Johnson got this $1.2 trillion spending bill passed doing precisely what Kevin McCarthy did to trigger Matt Gaetz's wrath. Gaetz initially introduced the motion for McCarthy to vacate the chair because McCarthy was suspending regular order, passing bills through suspension and bundling them together, not allowing members to vote on single subject bills. Gaetz, for example, objected to lumping 6 appropriations bills into a minibus bill where the leadership says to the rank and file members of Congress, take it or leave it, which is exactly what Mike Johnson did to pass both spending bills this month. They were minibus bills. He lumped 6 appropriations bills into one bill. Plus, Mike Johnson went back on a promise. He didn't give members 72 hours to read the 1,000-page bill filled with about 1,000 earmarks. He didn't give members of Congress the 72 hours he promised he would give them to read the bill. They had little more than 24 hours. But Matt Gaetz isn't supporting a motion to vacate the chair. So why? He probably likes Mike Johnson more than he liked Kevin McCarthy, or he knows Johnson needs him. And since Johnson needs him, maybe Johnson could somehow make that pesky House ethics investigation into Gaetz's possible criminal behavior with underage girls disappear. See, when you're down to a 1-vote majority, do you really care if Matt Gaetz may or may not have transported underage girls across the state lines and then plied them with drugs for sex? I know Mike Johnson is Christy, but Matt Gaetz gets kicked out of the House, there goes Mike's majority. So, Republican Tim Burchett from the crappy state of Tennessee is one of the members of Congress dubbed the Crazy Eight by Kevin McCarthy because they all voted to remove him. You might remember Kevin McCarthy returned the favor by kidney punching Burchett. Burchett said he was disappointed in how Mike Johnson got Friday's spending bill passed, but said he's not yet ready to join Marjorie Taylor Greene in voting to remove Johnson. Why? Because Mike Johnson is deeply religious, and so is Congressman Tim Burchett. You might remember, this is one of my favorite stories, the night before Congress voted to remove Kevin McCarthy called Tim Burchett asking for his vote. And Burchett said to McCarthy, well, I don't have an answer right now. I'm praying on it. And Kevin McCarthy began to laugh. And Congressman Tim Burchett said, "What's so funny?" And Kevin McCarthy said, "Seriously, you're preying on it?" And Tim Burchett said, "Yes." And then Kevin McCarthy kept laughing at him. And he said, basically, "What, you're asking Jesus if you should vote for me?" And then he continued to laugh. And Burchett went public the next day and said he could not bring himself to vote for Kevin McCarthy now because he was so disrespectful of his religious beliefs. As I've said before, it's the only good thing Kevin McCarthy ever did was laugh at Tim Burchett when he said, "I'm preying on it." And so Tim Burchett voted for McCarthy to leave, and Kevin McCarthy kidney punched him. Burchett is deeply religious. Mike Johnson is deeply religious. So I think Tim Burchett is pretty sure Mike Johnson's never going to kidney punch him. I don't think Tim Burchett's going to vote for Mike Johnson to vacate the chair. Johnson is kind of fascinating. He's inexperienced, but he is a politician. He doesn't have the reputation of lying to his caucus yet because he hasn't been around long enough. Kevin McCarthy's problem was if you had one word to describe Kevin McCarthy, it was liar. You get a sense that Mike Johnson doesn't stir up resentment among the party faithful the way Kevin McCarthy did. I would be surprised if Marjorie Taylor Greene follows through with her motion to vacate the chair, especially since Trump, at least for the time being, loves Mike Johnson. Loves him. Because Johnson isn't just an election denier. He wrote the amicus brief that a majority of House Republicans signed back in 2020 to support Texas's suit before the Supreme Court challenging Joe Biden's victory. The court immediately dismissed the case, and nobody's really sure Johnson is telling the truth when he said he wrote the amicus brief. Liz Cheney doesn't think he wrote it. She thinks it was written by someone in the Trump White House because it was so poorly reasoned. But the point is, Mike Johnson is in Trump's pocket. And if you go against Johnson, you go against Trump. Marjorie Taylor Greene takes her marching orders from Trump. In fact, one of the reasons Marjorie Taylor Greene got kicked out of the Freedom Caucus is because back in January of last year, she supported Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, even though the hard-right Freedom Caucus hates Kevin McCarthy. But Donald Trump at the time was whipping votes for McCarthy. This was back in January of 2023. And so Marjorie Taylor Greene knew where her loyalties lie. They were with Donald Trump, not the Freedom Caucus, even though she was a member of the Freedom Caucus, a dues-paying member. So she went all in on Kevin McCarthy, and there were rumors that Kevin McCarthy went all in on Marjorie Taylor Greene. And by doing that, Marjorie Taylor Greene became a pariah, a persona non grata with the Freedom Caucus. The Freedom Caucus hated Marjorie Taylor Greene for supporting Kevin McCarthy. That, and I'm not making this up, she called Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert a little bitch. Lauren Boebert is a proud and beloved member of the Freedom Caucus. You don't walk up to Lauren Boebert and call her a little bitch, and that's what Marjorie Taylor Greene did. She walked up to Lauren Boebert and said, "You're a little bitch." Why did she say that? Because Lauren Boebert introduced her own articles of impeachment for Joe Biden instead of signing on to the articles of impeachment that Marjorie Taylor Greene had already introduced. She said, "You're a little bitch and you plagiarized my articles of impeachment." And she got in her face. She was menacing and threatening. And the argument I'm not making this up. It eventually led into the women's lavatory in the House of Representatives. That was in June of last year. And then, and I'm not making this up, this is from the Daily Beast, Marjorie got kicked out of the Freedom Caucus, and then she wouldn't stop calling Lauren Boebert a whore. After the Beetlejuice, after she was feeling up the guy and he was feeling up her during a performance of Beetlejuice, Marjorie Taylor Greene kept walking around the floor of the House going, Lauren Boebert's a whore. Lauren Boebert's a whore. I'm not making that up. So she is not liked in the Freedom Caucus, and they parted ways. And Trump and McCarthy eventually parted ways in the lead up to the vote last October for Kevin McCarthy to vacate the chair. Trump whipped the votes in January of 2023 for Kevin McCarthy, but he wasn't whipping votes for Kevin McCarthy in October of last year. Trump felt McCarthy wasn't sufficiently loyal because after 9 months as Speaker, McCarthy failed to scrub the 2 impeachments against Donald Trump off the record books, which you can't do because there are no record books. This isn't baseball. And impeachments are basically indictments. You cannot reverse an indictment. You can reverse a conviction. You can appeal a conviction, but an indictment is an indictment. It can't be reversed. But why would you expect Donald Trump to know that? So, is Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion for Mike Johnson to vacate the chair going to get voted on? That's up to Marjorie. And the way she filed the motion suggests she isn't serious, that this was a kabuki dance, and it's getting tiresome. There are 2 ways to file a motion. One way is to file a motion by going down to the floor in person and filing it, and that's called privileged. Privileged. Privileged means it has to be voted on in 2 days. The other way to file the motion is through regular order, which means it's turned over to the Rules Committee, where the motion would most likely get buried. Marjorie filed her motion through regular order, which means she's merely putting Speaker Mike Johnson on notice. She's saying, I'm a malignant narcissist. I require constant attention. You're not giving me the attention that Kevin McCarthy gave me, and Donald Trump has been ignoring me lately, so you better do something to feed my insatiable thirst for attention. And he'll do something to make her feel special. I think she filed the initial motion to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas, but she did it through a privileged motion, which meant it had to be voted on in 2 days, and it didn't get passed. People voted against the privileged motion. But somebody else introduced a motion to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas through regular order, and that and they impeached Mayorkas. You never know with the Republican Party. You just don't know. But I think because the job of Speaker has become so impossible, that actually works in Mike Johnson's favor. The fact that nobody wants the job. It's almost as tough as playing the role of Donald Trump's 4th wife. Melania, somebody's got to replace Melania. Where do you find somebody who has no sense of smell? Apparently, the pungent odor, people just they shake hands with Donald Trump and they just gag from the smell. I'm not making that up. It is just a powerfully, it's like a clove of garlic stuffed in dog crap with Aramis sprayed over it. That's what Donald Trump smells like. So, Mike Johnson. I think a lot of people, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, are going to end up cutting him a lot of slack. Problem for Mike Johnson is nobody likes him. Nobody liked Kevin McCarthy, but Kevin McCarthy had a fundraising proficiency that was only equaled by Republican Majority Leader Steve Scalise. Kevin McCarthy, first and foremost, was able to make it rain, and he spread that money around, which is why he finally became Speaker. That's how you become Speaker. You buy it. Nancy Pelosi is an amazing fundraiser. Mike Johnson, however, we're not even sure he has a bank account. And Bloomberg is reporting that rich Republican donors can't stand him. They are reportedly turned off by how he wears his Christianity on his sleeve when he's trying to raise money, and they say that has a whiff of hypocrisy. This is why, if you go by fundraising alone, we may be looking at a wave election come November. The polls are changing. There's been a major bump since the State of the Union, and we may be looking at a blue wave election. The Republican Congressional Committee only raised $8.2 million in February. All Mike Johnson could raise in February was $8.2 million. And this is what it all gets down to. Not if he's likable, not if he's trustworthy. Can he raise money? He's not raising money. He's trying. I think he traveled to all 50 states. People aren't opening up their checkbooks for Mike Johnson. The DCCC, that would be the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, has raised double what the Republican Congressional Committee raised in February. The same goes for the Senate and Biden. Democrats are outraising Republicans by extraordinary margins. So, because Mike Johnson is bad at fundraising, lovable as he is, devout as he is, he won't be spreading cash around the way Kevin McCarthy or Nancy Pelosi did. And that will eventually make him less lovable and more susceptible to a revolt. I don't think they're going to vote him out, but who knows? Who knows? The House takes 2 weeks off, a well-deserved vacation, and when Johnson comes back, history is watching him. He has to figure out Ukraine. If Ukraine falls, it will be his fault, and his fault alone, for not bringing the Ukraine supplemental to the floor for a vote. We know it would pass. He will not release the bill. Ukraine is not doing well. It will be on Speaker Mike Johnson if Zelensky falls, because the votes for the supplemental are there. Mike Johnson won't allow it. Now, one of the side deals that's being reported is that if there's a revolt within the GOP caucus and Marjorie Taylor Greene's motion to vacate the chair makes it to the floor, Democrats have reportedly signaled to Johnson they will vote for him for Speaker, but as Donald Trump once told Zelensky, first, I need you to do me a favor. And that favor is get $61 billion to Zelensky now. Bring the Ukraine supplemental to the floor for a vote, and the Democrats will back you for Speaker. The great Jamie Raskin, Democratic congressman from Maryland, said on Friday that he is open to voting for Mike Johnson for Speaker if Johnson will do the right thing and finally bring the Ukraine supplemental to the floor for a vote. And Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger of Virginia told Politico she, too, would vote for Johnson if he, quote, demonstrated a willingness to govern in a way that is helpful to the plight of democracy and our allies across the world, unquote. Tom Suozzi, Democrat, who has George Santos' seat. He just won George Santos' seat in a special election. He said if Mike Johnson will bring the Ukraine floor to a vote, he will support him as Speaker. You cannot overstate the power Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have over some Republicans of the House of Representatives, where the Ukraine supplemental has been languishing since last August. And the longer we go without funding Ukraine, the more Russia succeeds. Russia, some say, is winning in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin on Saturday said the 4 men arrested for setting a suburban Moscow concert hall on fire, killing 140 people, were heading for Ukraine before they were captured. The Ukrainian government immediately denied playing any role. The Biden administration said American intelligence agencies have concluded ISIS was behind the attack. They concluded that after ISIS took credit for the attack. Our intelligence agencies hard at work. Thank you. Putin's government said all 4 suspects were not Russian citizens. The attack began Friday night when terrorists began firing automatic rifles at concert goers and then set fire to the building. Authorities say the toxic fumes alone proved to be deadly for many of the victims. This has been the mop-up for March 24th, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York City on cold medicine, Sudafed, NyQuil, Benadryl. Thank you for finding me. I don't know if any of this made sense. It sounded okay. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Leave a comment. I read all your comments. Thank you to Bob in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. I have a head cold, so I've been just, so I don't know if any of this made sense. But I think I'm going to do a show tomorrow if I have the energy. Thank you so much. It is a privilege to be able to talk to you. Thank you.